Good evening and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the history and geography of Mongolia. Mongolia is located in northwestern Asia, I suppose. It's bordered by Russia up here and China down here. It is landlocked. And there's an interesting little bit right over here. There's a piece of China that separates Mongolia from Kazakhstan right here. So Kazakhstan and Mongolia don't border, even though they're just about to touch right there. So Mongolia's landscape is, in a nutshell, split into two different regions. Let's start in the south here in the Gobi Desert. The big Gobi, the largest desert in Asia. It actually goes way further down into China over here, but it takes up about a big chunk of Mongolia, about like a good half of it, I'd say. The Gobi Desert, that's a picture of it up here. It is a desert. It's very dry, rocky, very flat, and desert-like. As we travel more north, we enter these steppes. We've talked about the Eurasian steppes in the Kazakhstan episode. Way over in Ukraine, we talked about the steppes over there. They stretch all the way across this continent, and they are very prominent and very famous in Mongolia, which we'll discuss why in its history. The steppes in Mongolia aren't completely flat. They do get a little hilly and a little wet. Let's talk about it. We have the Altai mountain range up here. These are the highest mountains in Mongolia. Up here, these are the Khangal mountains. And these mountains over here are the Khanti, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Mongolian's one of those languages that there's like accepted ways to pronounce it in English, but the real way it's pronounced is completely different, so don't quote me on that. Kenti, I want to say. It's in these mountains we can find Ulaanbaatar, the capital city. There's also quite a lot of waterways flowing down from Lake Baikal, my favorite lake in the world. It's so cool. And lots of different rivers end up flowing through the mountain areas down into the steppes here. This region over here is their little lake district. The biggest one is Lake Ouz, I want to say Ouz, right there. But lots of different little streams and lakes and things in this area. And honestly, for the most part, that's about it. Mongolia is very flat, very dry, very plain and beautiful. Honestly, its nickname is the land of the clear blue sky, and because it's one of those places where you stand in the field and everything stretches out beyond the sky, the landscape. It's very, very vast. So what makes the Mongolian steppe a little bit more famous than the rest of the steppes is that a nomadic culture has lived on them since forever. We'll mention them right at the beginning of history. I guess that's a good way to seg into it, isn't it? So let's do that. Actually, there's some interesting history in Mongolia before the humans. In the Mongolian area of the Gobi Desert, many, many different dinosaur bones have been found. And it's like a big hotspot for some of the more famous ones like velociraptors and stuff. These mountains were at one time volcanic, so the flows and things kind of created some interesting dinosaur burial grounds. Like there's fossilized eggs and all sorts of neat dinosaur things that have been found there, along with early human stuff. And those early humans would have arrived about 20,000 years ago, from what we can tell from some of the artwork they've left behind, and they're very interesting. A lot of Mongolian rock art depicts people riding horses, so like I said, people have been riding horses out on these steppes since forever. And of course, me as a stone circle nerd, if you've seen some of my other videos that have countries with famous stone circles. Mongolia doesn't have stone circles, but they do have some interesting stones around called deer stones that just in the middle of this flat, stretching forever plain, they are just these stones that are placed, and they have pictures of flying deer on them. No one really knows what they were for. They're probably a marker of some event. Maybe it was some kind of old signpost or memorial. There's really the later ones have graves next to them, but not the old ones. So we'll never know probably, but really interesting in my opinion. I find stuff like that to be so cool. But a culture of pastoral nomadism took hold in the area for a long, long, long time, which means that they rode their horses or yaks or whatever creature they were using to transport their homes around and raise their livestock, maybe do just a smidge of farming. Mongolia's not very arable. But that's just the way life was for a long time. And clans would form, and some clans would conflict with each other. Little wars would break out. Some would form huge clans. Those clans would fracture, so on throughout history. That's going to happen a lot in Mongolia's history. So if I ever say there was like clans, that's pretty much what I mean. The first big, major one was the Xiongnu, and they were conquerors. Conquering is in these people's blood. And they started to raid what's now China. Then it was the Qin Dynasty. We know that the very, very famous Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi was the ruler at this time, got really fed up by these northern invaders trying to take over, so he started to build a wall to try to keep them out, which over time would evolve into the Great Wall of China. The different nomadic groups started to form into tribes and clans that were known as Khanates, with the Khan being the ruler, and of course, you know what's coming, right? The person who united basically all the tribes together into one big Khanate was Genghis Khan. He was named that in 1206. That's not his real name. That's his title. Like the great ruler, I think it means something like that. And he was unstoppable. He's still a big hero in Mongolia, even though he committed really horrific things across the world, but he built the world's largest land empire, stretching from the Korean peninsula all the way over to like Poland, heading down toward the Arabian Peninsula and down near like Vietnam. Huge, huge empire this guy managed to build up, thanks to whenever he would take over a place, he would completely raze it and take prisoners, and the men were drafted into his army. So if, you know, they had nothing else to do, their city was gone, right? So as he moved, the larger and larger his army got and the more unstoppable he got. After he died, he had, I mean, very famously, he had like hundreds of kids, if not thousands. And I forget it. I want to say like 13% of the world right now is descended from Genghis Khan. It was something like that. He could have been your great grandfather, for all you know. But his Khanate was split between 4 sons, and of course those 4 sons warred and fought and all of that. One of his grandsons, actually, Kublai Khan, kind of like the second most famous of his line, his lineage, wound up ruling most of what's now China, Mongolia, this whole area, and started the Yuan Dynasty. He ruled it from Beijing, and it was very, very prosperous at the time, until he was expelled in 1368 by what would become the Ming Dynasty. And the Ming Dynasty is very famous for actually building the Great Wall of China to keep these people out of what's now China once and for all. So essentially, the might of the Yuan Dynasty was sent back up here to the north where it all began. And that's when more of those Khanates fought and split and joined, so on and so forth, all throughout this upper area here. One interesting tidbit about the conquering of the area is that one of the Khans, oh, I forget, I want to say it was one of Genghis Khan's sons, or a Genghis Khan descendant, right? Maybe great grandson at this point, was ruling over the area that's now Tibet, and learned about Tibetan Buddhism and brought it back up to Mongolia, and the religion took hold on the area. Pretty much almost everyone converted, except for those who were still living like nomadic lifestyles, riding around their horses, doing their shamanistic religion, but the majority of people up here embraced Tibetan Buddhism. They built lots of different temples where the lamas could practice and live their monastic life and preach Buddhism, and it was a big to do. It greatly influenced not just life up here, but life in Tibet as well. Basically, like, Tibet's biggest fans were up here, and hundreds and hundreds of temples were built. There were thousands of lamas, tens of thousands of lamas living up here. In the 17th century, the Manchu people who lived over here, you can see Manchuria right here, they formed the last great Chinese dynasty, the Qin Dynasty. Took over the area and took over this area amid much conflict before and after the takeover, until that dynasty collapsed in 1911, and we have I want to say the People's Republic of China, but I can't remember if that was its name at that point. It was China. It officially became China, so I can stop saying what's now known as China. It became China. This area of Mongolia stayed part of China. You can see it's called Inner Mongolia, and this area became known as Outer Mongolia. Outer Mongolia declared independence after the Qing Dynasty fell apart, and after a while, the Chinese were like, no, you're actually part of China. We're going to come and conquer you. And that was in about 1919. Meanwhile, up in the north here in Russia, the Tsarist government collapsed, and the Bolsheviks were taking over. And quite a few pro-Tsarist generals and soldiers fled into Mongolia for safety. One of them, whose nickname became known as the Mad Baron, decided that he was going to help the Mongolians fight for independence, and he's like a very eccentric character in Mongolian history. But there was a hero who's beloved in Mongolia, who in 1920 went to the Bolshevik Russians and asked for help against the invading Chinese. His name was Damdin Suk-Batar. They renamed Ulaanbaatar after him. It means red hero. He essentially helped bring the Russians down and fought off the Chinese and managed to maintain the independence here. The other big hero of it was called the Outer Mongolian Revolution, sorry. The other big hero of that was Khorgulin Choibalsan. In 1924, the Mongolian People's Republic was founded, and Choibalsan was the leader. He was very pro-Soviet. I mean, considering how the Soviets saved their country, but implemented a lot of very Stalinist practices in Mongolia. He wanted to eliminate religion, so pretty much all the Buddhist temples were destroyed. There were quite a few. Thankfully, the oldest one in Ardene was spared. You'll see a picture of it in this book later. But like 99% of these beautiful Buddhist temples were destroyed, and many, many lamas were executed, exiled, all those horrific things. So they really tried hard to make it into a secular society while, trying to make it a little more modernized. Mongolia at this point was still pretty much just horses riding around on the steppe with a few cities here and there. You can see where to go. Choibalsan right here. A little Soviet city. The Soviets would come in eventually. You know how the Soviets would build like little Soviet cities, right? There'd be nothing, and boom, there would be a Soviet-style city. That's what I'm trying to say. You understand the brutalist architecture, just like sprung up, made out of concrete, and yeah, a lot of those would pop up in Mongolia after World War II. Speaking of World War II, very famously, the Japanese invaded Manchuria, and the Soviets helped stop the Japanese from invading Mongolia. They managed to fend them off, which is very hard to do against the Japanese in World War II. So again, the Mongolian people were very, very thankful to the USSR for that, and became a satellite state of the USSR, meaning that they weren't part of the USSR, but they were very much aligned with their ideals and government and things like that. It was all very intertwined. But in 1990, it was very clear that the Soviet Union was beginning to crumble. The democratic revolution took place. It was very peaceful. It led to a brand new Mongolia, market economy, multi-party government, all the things that a democracy would bring. They wrote a new constitution in 1992 and have been on the up and up ever since in terms of Mongolian up and up, which is a little different from other democratic countries around the world. For the most part, it's still people riding around on horses across the steppe, right? The cities you can see are pretty much all up here, centered around the capital where the majority of people in Mongolia live. There are a few big buildings and lots of industry there. But for the most part, Mongolia's income comes from mining at this point. Lots of interesting mineral mines in the Gobi Desert. Like I said, this was volcanic, right? Generates lots of interesting mining areas. But for the most part, coal is mined in Mongolia because it's very hard to get energy grids set up in this area. That's mostly just flat plains. You know, how are you going to put like telephone wires and stuff? Not telephone wires, but like the wires. I don't know electricity. You know what I mean? It's a little hard to set up sometimes. So a lot of places in the north of Mongolia are coal powered whenever the electricity fails, which has led to Ulaanbaatar having some of the worst pollution in the world after burning all that coal. But that is pretty much it for the history of Mongolia. It's always been people riding across the steppes on their horses. It still is people riding across the steppes on their horses. Not as many as before, obviously, but they're still there. And they have a special kind of yurt called a ger that they transport around. They raise camels, goats, all the different kind of animals that you can easily round up and send out, like goats and cows sometimes. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Mongolia. It's a very interesting place. Oh, by the way, because when I think of Mongolia, besides thinking of the steppes and Genghis Khan, I think of Mongolian barbecue, which is delicious. It does not come from Mongolia. It comes from Inner Mongolia. It's a Chinese food. Doesn't mean it isn't superior. It's so good. Definitely like top 5 barbecues around the world. So anyway, let's flip through this book. Look at this picture. It's of a little sweet with a very sweet goat. 2 little kids, right? Let's look at some pictures of beautiful Mongolia so you can get a good idea of what I'm talking about. Look at this is what their military wears today. That's their standard uniform. That's pretty cool. Let's see. Oh, this is it's Mongolian, but he's wearing Kazakhs. There are still lots of Kazakhs living in this area, which if you want to know why, watch my Kazakhstan episode. They did not fare so well under Soviet control. There's a big old back-trained camel with a little one there. Here's a political map of Mongolia. There's a big national park there to protect lots of the beautiful scenery and wildlife there, which we're going to see in a little bit. There's this is traditional life in the winter, herding their sheep, it looks like, yeah. With looking like it's the 1200s again. That style of life has never changed. Here's the inside of a ger. It's very much like a yurt, with some notable differences. I think the biggest difference I can tell is that a ger has an actual wooden door. You'll see pictures of it later. These are in the Altai Mountains, the big rocky mountains of Mongolia. You can see some of the lakes there too. And some kind of hilly, flat, barren land of Mongolia. These people are herding reindeers in the winter up in the snowy mountains. Oh, I forgot to mention the taiga forest. The northern area is very forested because it's part of the taiga, the world's largest forest. So there's lots of these big old trees, lots of untouched wilderness there. Here is in the Gobi Desert. This area is called the Flaming Cliffs. And you can see they're digging up dinosaur bones here. He's herding his sheepy friends out there, out on his horse, just doing what his people have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. Here's a good physical map. The highest point is right here, Mount Huiten. There's the Ouvs Lake, all the different mountains, and lots of different peaks. There's the Flaming Cliffs I just showed you. Really interesting landscape. Here's some sands of the Gobi. These are singing sands, apparently, meaning you can hear a note as the wind blows over them. It's a bad place for a pencil. It's going to roll off. The Oricon River, which is the largest river in Mongolia, flowing down from the north. Here's a dino guy with his dino bones. He looks very proud of them. The Blue Pearls. This is Hovsgol Lake, which is up here, up in the north. Gorgeous. It looks like Lake Tahoe near where I live. Just very like vividly blue, right? Lots of woolly sheepies. Mongolia exports a lot of cashmere, so they raise cashmere goats for their very soft hair. A sandstorm in the Gobi. And let's see, this city is Ardene near Ulaanbaatar. Some gorgeous trees here, changing in the autumn. Beautiful flowers. So when it finally does rain in parts of the steppes, it winds up looking like this. And here's some more Gobi Desert landscape. The national flower, is it? Yes, the Scabiosa butterfly blue. Very pretty. And here's a snow leopard, a very endangered animal. I was reading, I think, in this book about the Gobi bears. It's the world's smallest bear and the most endangered bear. There's not a lot left. And they're so cute. They're tiny. They look like Winnie the Pooh. I wish there was a picture. But my favorite animal of this area, here he comes. The Saga Antelope. Look at this goofy clown. So this is an antelope. It's a deer, but they've got a snout. So they look like weird aliens, and they look very goofy, and they're very sweet. And I want to see one someday. They're so funny looking. Here's the Taki Horse, as it's known in Mongolia. Let's see, the name that I know them as, is it saying here? I forget. It's like a very complicated name. No. But I mentioned them when I just did my cave art video, because in Spain there were paintings of these horses, right? Very cool. They're very wild in Mongolia. They still roam free, untamed. It's pretty cool. Here is a Agama lizard. And a pastime that's still in practice today is hawking. It's a very important tradition. The waters have these huge fish called taimen. Does it say how much they grow by up in here? The giant taimen, it grows 6 feet or 2 meters long. He's just snatching it out the water. That's how big this guy is. And I guess they're very fierce predators, it talks about down here. The white-naped crane. Very beautiful crane. Here's some ibexes. They look like, what are you doing here? And a little monastery there, looks like. It says it was destroyed in the 1930s and rebuilt. Here's some of those carved stones. I don't think these are some deer stones. There might be a picture later. I'm not sure if it's in this book or not, but some of the more ancient stones that have been erected. and some of the really incredible rock art. Really interesting. You see the big old ibexes and things there. They're very traditional saddles, which they invented the stirrup, I believe. I want to say they invented the stirrup so that they could stand and shoot arrows at the same time on their horses. The early empires, all the yellow, there's the Xiongnu, and all the various different Khanids that I didn't mention because there are just too many. Just to say, oh, they rose to power, they took over, and then they lost power. Anyway, here's Genghis Khan. The more politically correct thing to call him now is Genghis Khan. But Genghis Khan is what he's been known as in the West since forever. So there he is. There he is again. A very Soviet-style artwork there as he leads his soldiers out. And you can see that the fighters come from all different parts of the world, right? Because they all come from places he conquered. And Mongolia is very famous for this gigantic statue of him. Look, these are people. He dominates the landscape there, looking out over the land that he once ruled. Here's an old drawing of people crossing the Silk Road. In Mongolia, that area is known as the Tea Road. The Mongol Empire, so yeah, that's as far as it stretched. The whole colors there is by 1259. Absolutely incredible how much it grew. This is Kublai Khan's mom. I'm saying Cobra Kai. Kublai Khan's mom, famous figure there. There he is with Marco Polo, who visited and loved it and stayed for 20 years. And a majority of his book is about Kublai Khan and his court. Here's Altan Khan. He's the guy that brought Tibetan Buddhism to Mongolia. And here's a very famous Khatun, a female Khan, who she married him when she was very young and he was very old, so he died, and she's like, actually, I'm in charge now, and took over. Let's see, this is Ulaanbaatar 1920. You can see they're just springing up there. And here's Sukbatar, the red hero of Mongolia, in Sukbatar Square. Let's see, there's some Soviets there marching. Oh, there he is, there's Sukbatar. Soviets marching through. This was the last Khan. He's known as the Bogd Khan. As you can tell, he was a very prominent Tibetan-style Lama who was named the, apparently he's the third in line in the importance of Dalai Lama. He's number 3, the Bogd Khan. And when Mongolia declared independence, they just made him the de facto ruler because he was the most important person in the country. But after the government was implemented, after his death, they got rid of the whole Lama superiority kind of thing. This is that peaceful protest in 1990. And Mongolia today, people just chilling, living their lives. Very cool. This is the Parliament building. Look at the soldiers. That's their uniform. That's so cool. And there's, of course, big old Genghis Khan sitting there. This was the prime minister at the time that this book came out, and he's shaking hands with Shinzo Abe, who actually was just recently assassinated. He was the former prime minister of Japan. Here's the Great Khural, which is kind of like their parliament / Congress / legislative branch. Here's the flag of Mongolia, and it is an interesting one. It says, the national flag of Mongolia consists of a rectangle divided vertically into 3 equal parts. The left and right stripes are red, symbolizing progress and prosperity. The center stripe is blue, standing for Mongolia's eternal blue sky. On the red stripe nearest the flagpole is a golden symbol called the Suyombo, which derives from a 17th century Mongolian script. The characters in the Suyombo have the following meanings. The 3 tongues of flame stand for the past, present, and future. The sun and moon, see the sun and the moon, are symbols of growth, wealth, and success. The 2 down-pointing triangles, I just lost my place, I was looking at the picture. The two downward pointing triangles represent an arrow indicating the defeat of Mongolia's enemies. The two horizontal rectangles symbolize equality for all. The circular yin-yang symbol indicates the unity of opposing forces. The two vertical rectangles suggest the walls of a fort, representing the strength of the Mongolian people. So much happening in that one symbol. Apparently there's quite a few symbols like this in Mongolian history, but the Soyombo is the most important. There's a very nice parade there, lots of flags flying. And here's Ulaanbaatar. It's a big city now. And a little map of downtown Ulaanbaatar. See the Genghis Khan Square, Sukbatar Square, a big old park there, and lots of other buildings. This is like the most famous of the modern buildings in Ulaanbaatar. It's called the Blue Sky Tower. And the caption here says it's an office building / hotel. I thought it was just a hotel, so I guess people work there. That's pretty cool, but it's a lovely looking building. Some of the few arable plains in Mongolia. This guy's growing some wheat and herding lots and lots of goats, looks like, on top of his horsey. Resources map. You can just see how much is barren. You can see the mining happening there, and lots of sheep, camels, cattle, sheep. Some mining up there, potatoes. Here's the copper mine here. They produce a lot of copper wiring in Mongolia, actually. And this is at a cashmere factory, making some cashmere blankets and clothes and things. Here's their really neat currency. It's called the Tugrik. Does it say who this is? I guess that's Sukbatar. Anyway, I like this guy. That's a really cool symbol there. And she's getting a little health check, since health, being in a very polluted capital city, is not the best in Ulaanbaatar. They have a big railway that's R and W words are hard for me. Railway that goes north to south through Mongolia. And a very trafficy, busy day in Ulaanbaatar. You can see the smog in the sky there. This gear is solar powered. I want a yurt so bad. Oh my gosh, I wish I lived in a yurt. I wish I could just travel and just build up a yurt and just go wherever. This guy and his horse is about to drop the hottest rap album of the year, apparently. Here's another form of traditional home. It was kind of like a teepee that we'd say in America. And this is a reindeer herder. This is giving big Princess Mononoke vibes, but that's incredible. Riding around on the reindeer. Playing some chess here. These are people from the Tuvan ethnic group. And you can do some camel riding if you visit the area. There's an interesting tourist experience. Oh, it's like homesteading or something, where you go out in their gear and just like live for a few days out on the steppes with the nomads and do things like this. They use the Cyrillic alphabet for the most part. There's some Latin script around, but it's still mostly Cyrillic. And they're working very hard in school. Taking notes, it looks like. Population map. Mongolia is incredibly sparsely populated. You can really see a lot of people here in Ulaanbaatar and not really anywhere else. Here is a deer stone. So cool. The deer flying up to the sky. Very cool. This is one of these really cool little shrine areas out on the steppe, and people leave offerings and like robes and things, scarves, jewelry on them as like a thank you. This shaman here is doing a really cool looking ritual, all dressed up in their finest. There's some monks taking a break there, having some, I'm about to say tea, it kind of looks like milk coming out, I'm not sure. Big old Buddha statue with the prayer wheels there. This is, that's Kublai Khan, but this is this Buddhist priest that like he was obsessed with. He made him like a very prominent figure in his government because he just thought he was rad. There's some more prayer wheels there, like staple of Tibetan Buddhism that you spin. Actually, I think you spin them clockwise. Does it say in here? I'm not sure. Anyway, you spin it a certain way while you say your prayer, and all the energy inside goes out into the world. And these are Kazakh people. This talks about, because this is the religion chapter, how a majority of Kazakhs are Muslim. This is the Ardene Zoo, the oldest Buddhist temple in Mongolia. It was one of the first, so thankfully it was preserved during that huge purge. Might have had some damage to it, but it's still there, which is very important. And this is a cool guy here during a festival. That's really neat. Look at all the skulls on his head. Not to mention the eyes. So neat. This is the famous horsehead fiddle, like the national instrument of Mongolia. This is a throat singer. So, let's say which culture does the throat singing. The Tuva people. So not all Mongolians do this, but if you've never heard Mongolian throat singing, they can sing like 2 to 3 notes at a time, and it's absolutely... I have no words for it. It's haunting and beautiful and spectacular. Absolutely look up Mongolian throat singing if you've never heard it before. So this is one of the doors to a ger. I'm pretty sure that the biggest difference between a yurt and a ger is that the gers have like an actual door, whereas a yurt has like a tent flap. This guy's got his eagle ready to go. And let's see, this is a tanka, very old painting of a monk there. Looks a little sad, but maybe it's because that tiger's coming toward him. They're building up their gear. So yeah, it has like a big wooden framework, which yurts don't really have like that durable of a frame. They're more tent-like. This was a very famous artist, that's his little self-portrait, who painted and made really incredible statues of the Buddha. And he developed the Soyombo script too. The Mongolian State Academic Theater of Opera and Ballet, which I assume they do Russian-style ballet. I've never heard of Mongolian-style ballet, so I assume they follow the Russian school, which is the hardest form of ballet. Let me tell you, oh my gosh, it's so hard. This is a famous Mongolian filmmaker named Byambasurindava. This is her first movie, The Story of the Weeping Camel, making movies depicting nomadic Mongolian life. This is to show off the Soviet-style buildings that still exist today. And here's a famous author. His name is David Kugeltinoff. It looks like he's giving a talk of some kind. Maybe he's reciting a poem. There's a family ready to go on their motorcycle. And a little sweet there. This talks about how the child's hair is grown out to their like 4 or 5 years old, and they have a ceremonial hair cutting. Beautiful wedding. Here's an example of a traditional wedding versus a more modern wedding. It talks about it in here. There's a certain holiday where it's very lucky to get married. So they have a big building called the wedding tent that schedules like, the wedding palace, where like people like walk in, get married, walk out, next couple walks in, gets married, to make it more efficient, I suppose. He's got a cool hat there, and very nice blue outfit. Eating some airag, which I think is like milk, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, mare's milk and fermented milk. Playing some basketball. And Mongolian kids, the nomadic kids, play with these sheep ankle bones, and there's a variety of different dice games and throwing games that you can play with them. They're called shagai. Oh, that's my idea of heaven, just riding out on your horses. And Mongolians have a very interesting style of wrestling. They have a very interesting dress that they wear, pretty bare, and have a lot of different styles of fighting. And an archer. This is during Nadam, which there's actually a picture of it over here in my atlas, but I'm not going to move the camera. They do archery, wrestling, and horse racing during this big festival. Some llamas here. Very kindly looking old people. And some younger people enjoying the cold weather. It says that's Lunar New Year. And that's the end of our book. So thank you so much for watching. Isn't Mongolia interesting? It is such a neat place. Very different from everywhere else in the world. I remember I was putting off researching Mongolia until I finished researching Kazakhstan because they were almost back to back. Because I was like, oh, Mongolian culture is going to be too similar to the Kazakhstan, so I don't want to research them at the same time and have the cultures overlap. But I peeked into some of Mongolia books and found out that their culture is so different from over in Kazakhstan. It is a neat place and the wildest history, right? So anyway, I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good night. Good night.